everybody. It is now 12:30. We've moved on from G-strings and sequins. So you are in crafting characters readers care about, and hopefully you're in the right room. And if you're not, please feel free to stick around anyway. We're really just going to, I think the title of the panel explains itself. We're going to talk about crafting characters that makes people want to read the book and care further. And what I figured, we'll start at the far end. And you want to introduce yourself briefly and then tell us about a character that you wrote that you have a particular affection for, that you personally care about.
Okay. I'm Barbara Gregorich. I've been a published author since 1984. I started out writing children's books, then switched to adult baseball books, and then mystery novels. And my most recent book is my first science fiction novel, Exit Velocity, which is on sale down in the vendor's room. Okay, so I'm going to hold off on half that question about creating characters I really care about until later in our discussion, when I'll bring up deeply the parrot I was talking to Claire about. And I'll talk about another character who I care about. Exit Velocity has three main characters: Rowan, a 20-year-old working class woman looking for a job; Jake, a 25-year-old middle-class podcaster; and Deeply, the parrot from another planet. I care about all of them, but I think I put special care into developing Jake because in some ways he had the least to do in the novel, and so I wanted to craft him better because I didn't want him to appear weak because he had a little less to do. And so some of the special care I took into a character that I hope readers care about is that because he's Harvard educated, when his point of view chapters came up, I wrote in a different way. I wrote more complex sentences with a higher vocabulary level, and I also gave him a weakness, if you want to call it that, in that he has moved to Chicago from Boston, and while on the outside he's very confident, on the inside he feels that he doesn't fit in. He doesn't have a group or family to belong to. So I took special care in developing that, and for those reasons I really care about it.
Okay. Claire?
I'm Claire. That's the C in C.S.E. Cooney, which is what I write under and narrate audiobooks under. And I think I'll talk about Lainey, who's the main character of the St. Death books. What I love about Lainey is that Lainey, like that children's book, Stickler Loves the World, which I really love. Lainey loves the world. She loves the living and the dead. She loves the dead so much she raises them up from the dead because she is a necromancer, but the world's nicest necromancer. And when she encounters bones, she behaves the way you and I see people behave, or maybe you behave yourself around like kittens or like puppies. She's like, oh, a mouse skeleton. And in the book too, my favorite part to write, she steps foot on a limestone bridge, and then she experiences ecstasy, almost levitation level, but she's like, limestone, it's more organic than it is stone. It's made of all a million little fossils, and she just like, and they love her right back, and the bridge sort of like sings to her, and she's just like, I could just stay here and pray on the bridge all day, and then other things happen, but I just love her. I love how much she loves things, and I feel very warm to her about it. It gets her in trouble, but you can't help but love somebody who loves the world so much.
Hi, my name's Prof. I am actually a game designer by trade, but I'm a hobbyist writer, and I recently self-published a fantasy novel called An Unlikely Flop, which you can get in the merch store if there's any left. And it's about like fantasy creatures, and one of the characters that is very dear to me, his name is Hyatt. He's like a bird person. He's like a man with bird wings and bird feet and tail. And I have a chronic illness. I have fibromyalgia, and so I wrote into his character that he's also suffering from some chronic invisible illness that no one knows what it is or what caused it. And it's not like the primary focus of the story, but it's present in his character, and it affects a lot of the things he does and his relationships with other characters. And it was just a way for me to sort of express those experiences of what that's like. But it ended up that a lot of readers who also have that challenge really connected with him and would tell me about how it made them feel seen. And that was very special to me. So all my characters in that book are special and have little elements of myself, but that was one that made me happy to hear that it helped readers feel seen.
I love that.
My name is Randee Dawn. I'm an entertainment journalist. I write for outlets including Variety, the LA Times, and the Today Show. I'm also an author, and I have 2 of my books up front here. And they are also for sale next to Prof Brown's in the merch room. So don't forget about the merch room for all your book needs.
These are here too.
In the merch room. Go to the merch room, everybody. Go to the merch room.
Well, they are at the merch, but I'm at all panels and Claire's signing tomorrow at 5.
Oh, but some bookstore helped provide it, right?
Yeah.
I thought there was a bookstore here. No, never mind. It's not.
There is a dealer that's a pop-up bookstore that is selling books in the dealer's room.
That's different. That's different than the merch room.
Oh, dealer's room is different than the merch room.
Yes.
Sorry, everyone. It's in the
Okay.
dealer's room. Sorry.
No, it's okay. They sound similar for sure. I'm going to pick. I have a favorite character in each of the books, but in the funny book, the character that kind of surprised me, that turns out a lot of people really do care about, is a secondary character, and we'll get into that. But his name is Phil the Dragon.
Love him.
And he's an insecure security guard who is the security for this fae-based reality TV show that is the subject of the book. And he goes to therapy, and he's helpful, but he drinks a lot of sriracha, and that can make him very stoned. So like he kind of became this character that people love reading about. And I'll ask this later on and get more into it, but actually one of my favorite characters in my new book, which is a darker fantasy, is the antagonist character. I've written a novella about her that's separate from this book. And she's the fairy mistress character out of Irish folklore who inspires the poets and the musicians, but also steals their life at the same time. So I like her, but she's not an endearing character, but I do care about her.
But she's badass.
She's badass, exactly. Right, so just to sort of start off, we don't have to necessarily go in order. And by the way, we will take a break for questions, then we'll come back to the panel and we'll do another break for questions, so hold tight. It's funny, when I hear from people sometimes, they'll say they're only reading a book or a story for the plot. Like, I just want to know what's happening. But, or that that's the only thing that matters. What's the importance then for you of having 3-dimensional characters in a story, and like, what do they add, and is a story poorer for lack of character development?
I can start. So I have a dear friend who's an animator, and he's been in the animation business for a long time. And one of the things he talks about that's apparently a thing is you should be able to have a whole episode of a show where the prompt is just take 2 of your characters and they're stuck, locked in a closet together. And that should be enough to generate a compelling story. And that really stuck with me. So for at least how I write, I really enjoy writing character interactions, and sometimes that's where I start, is I'll have just like this idea for 2 characters and how they can interact. And I'm like, well, now I gotta figure out a story to shove this in. So I think it's not necessarily better one way or the other, but for me, the interactions between characters can generate so much of what the plot hooks into that's pretty much how I start.
I've forgotten the question. I know, okay. I was so intent on what you were saying. I'm actually, Randee, I am one of the people who is plot oriented, okay? But I feel, what I like about plot is it's cause and effect. It's a chain of events. Event A causes event B causes event C, and I love that connection, and I love anticipating where something's going to go because of that chain of events. But I do agree that if you have just a plot without characters who have depth, there's something about it when you finish reading the book that is weak or is kind of incomplete. And so I think that what characters add is depth. They kind of anchor the plot. They give it a gravitas, a weight that's very important.
I think being married to a game designer, and sometimes like the plot is like the mechanic of a game. It's what happens and how it happens, and a mechanic can be fun all by itself on the baseline. but it's like until the player interacts with it, it's just that thing. And Carlos, also very wise, last year's guest of honor, but he likes to say character is plot. So if you have a character that you'd follow anywhere, into a closet, for example, and you're following them through the events of the day, whatever they do is plot. And so when you have a compelling character, you're perforce going to have a compelling plot. You know how with a really good actor, you'd be like, I'll watch them read the phone book? And I feel like, or if you see a clown who has no lines at all and just just sees something on the floor and picks it up, and you're just watching, you're riveted because the way that clown picks up that coin. I feel like that is also with a writer who has the prose stylist that you'll follow, that has made that character so intriguing or compelling or disgusting that you'll just watch whatever they do. That is the feeling of plot.
I think a good thing that illustrates this is fan fiction, because a lot of people, they have their character that they want to read about, and they will just go and you will read whatever stories people come up that feature this character because you want to see their take on it. You want to have that gap in your heart filled when the series ends by seeing other adventures that they could go through. And I think that fan fiction inherently is character driven because of that. So it just sort of shows the power of compelling characters.
And I think as writers on the panel, we can all attest to the time when you get to a place in the story where you want the character to do something. The character is not going to do that thing, and the scene reads terribly because it's not true to the character. And it sounds a little airy-fairy, but it's absolutely 100% true.
It absolutely happens.
If you try to force a character to do something that is not in their nature, it's going to ruin that scene or ruin that story. And that's another thing, and that's how you know you've got a real character that is starting to speak for themselves and will start motivating the plot or changing the plot or taking it in a different direction than you wanted it to.
2 characters in my story fell in love without me planning it. And they demanded it. And I was like, what? It is weird. It's kind of surreal when it happens.
And early in the draft, there's 2 characters in this who I was like, they're supposed to end up together eventually. Like, I was planning for that, I was vibing with it, and by the 4th or 5th draft, it's like, in no world would these 2 people end up in this relationship after all that they've been through together. They will be much more like brother and sister, and a very complex brother and sister, and they'll love each other very deeply, and there might even be flashes of attraction, but just like that's acknowledged and not developed into, because it would be too weird, and that it's like you follow the psychology of the character as it evolves.
I also think that in novels that are purely plot-driven, the author makes the characters do what they wouldn't do. I'm sure we've all read fiction that at some point in the book we think, oh, wait a minute, that character wouldn't do that. There's just not enough motivation for the character to do that.
I see it in television a lot where they wanted to hit that plot beat, and so a character who would never have done it in the previous episode, they're like, let's make that person do it, and it's so jarring, it's like being slapped in the face.
Yeah. Right. And then, then you start to be able to see the hand of the author behind whatever's going on. That's when you sort of stumbled. Can you?
I do it a lot.
Doing fabulous drawing doodles up here.
I'll show them at the end.
Can you give us an example or two of a way in which you created a character that the readers will care about? Like, tell us about that person or that creature. I think Barbara at one point in a previous email referred to a character with a moral center as something that she gravitates to. Like, give us some specific elements that you think goes into making one of your characters or more of your characters.
Well, I'll give you 2 different examples of 2 different ways I created characters. One was in my previous novel, The F Words, which is a YA novel. I had for years, maybe 5 or 6 years, an image in my head of a teen boy standing on a chain link fence spray painting the F word on his high school wall. And this image just wouldn't go away. I think I actually might have wanted to be doing that. I don't know why it wouldn't go away, but eventually I just started writing a story, and that meant that I had to delve into why he would be doing that. And the story sprang from this image, the whole story did, and the whole character. And he did have a moral reason for doing it. It is a novel about social justice. The second example comes from Exit Velocity, where as I was writing, this is also a novel about the struggle for social justice, very, very different from the YA novel. I knew from having read a lot of what was called proletarian literature, books that, like by James T. Farrell, that was written in the 30s about the struggles of the working class for better conditions. I knew that there's a danger in writing social justice fiction, and that danger is that somewhere, someone or two or three characters are going to sound very preachy, okay? And that's going to just stop the reader dead in her tracks. She's just not going to want to be lectured to. So I asked myself, how can I solve this problem? And the common way of solving this problem is to have a naive narrator, and that's usually a child between the ages of 8 and 11. You know, children don't have the sophistication or understanding to understand, to accept the explanations of why things are the way they are. They'll ask innocent, perceptive questions. But I did not want to write about a child because it just didn't fit with the plot that I foresaw of the book, and so I came up with a being from another planet. And immediately, I didn't even have to think about it, it turned out to be a parrot. And maybe later I can talk about.
I'm so invested in it.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
The build up to
That's
this parent. Okay, so the question was, what extra something do you put into a character to make them likable, or?
Yeah, well, since we're talking about creating characters the readers care about, right? Like, what elements have you put into a character of yours that is going to make the readers care about?
So I wrote in my book, Bone Swans, it's a collection of novellas, and I used to have a lot more story dreams than I have now, but I had this weird dream. When I woke up, I'm like, I was so moved emotionally. And with the dream, it's a lot more about emotions, but I knew a couple things about the world, that some event had happened that wiped most of the world out, that there was a set of islands where the islanders were compelled to marry each other legally because they wanted to repopulate. It was important for their survival. So there were arranged marriages, therefore. And so the two characters in the dreams were like a young man, a very shy man from a poor family, and a woman of a slightly higher class or caste. And she was dead set on revenging her younger sister's murder. And murder in this day, in this world, was even more awful than it is now because there were so few people left, and including the murder of a child. So the last thing she wanted was to get married. She only accepted this young man because she pretty much figured she could control him. He was lower caste, he was shy. And he looks at her with such compassion, and he just wants to help her. And that doesn't necessarily mean helping her have revenge. He wants her to heal and to grieve. So this feeling when I woke up with these two people in an impossible situation. And then, you build the world around them, but mostly I wanted the reader to feel by the end what I felt for these two people. And one of the things I was thinking, it was that heretofore in fantasy, I'd read a lot of fantasy where the protagonists are beautiful. Young, amber hair, sapphire eyes, ivory skin, and the twinkle, the diamond, everything is jewel-like, everything is velvet, and silk and whatever. Everything has that language, and I wanted to write a protagonist like my own brothers, 6'2", like larger, like feel too big to be in a room. I wanted to write a character who has these beautiful thoughts, but when he's nervous, it clicks, like he stutters, so he often is very quiet. He's poorer, so he's kind of a little bit bullied. He's fully grown now, but super shy and super loving, and has a sister who is very fierce in his defense. And then this woman who was a fierce sister and couldn't defend her younger. And so between almost that fierceness and that gentleness was the thing that drew them together. And I loved him so much because I was trying to make him feel familiar and how I felt to people. I wanted to make somebody, without using beautiful words, so beautiful.
That's lovely.
So I was going to talk about a character from my novel, but you made me think of something. So I'm going to talk about a character I wrote in a fan fiction, who was also, it was also very much about social justice, and I had a similar thing of like, how do I get these things across without it feeling preachy? And for mine, I made that character the non-POV character. So you never get in his head, but your perspective comes from a character who has come and is not from the culture, which is very similar to being an alien. And so what they're not used to all of the things that happen in America that are messed up. And so it was a combination of that and also making sure that this character had flaws, right? They weren't the perfect activist. They had a temper. They got, you know, they would get really riled up about stuff. They were very, just their personality was very, I don't know how to put it, like, they were fun, they were good at banter, they loved their community, but they were really like rough around the edges. And so having that foil of, you know, the character who is learning about this culture, who maybe stands for a lot of things that, you know, the other character is angry about, and how they relate to each other and how their relationship ends up allowing the character to grow and show his values and show the social justice situations. And people, it was an OC, and you know in fan fiction, like, when people like an OC, that's like kind of a pretty big deal, right?
Can you tell me what OC means?
Oh, original character. So in fan fiction, original character is, you know, you write the people from the IP, all those characters, and then you like insert a character of your own. And it's, some people like are not fans of that, but a lot of people really like this character, and I think it has a lot to do with how I was able to bring up these social justice issues in a way that didn't feel preachy, that felt real, that was connected to like a real, like, flawed but lovable character.
Yeah, I think flawed has a lot to do with it also. You know, there's this idea that you need to have your characters, you know, be as human as possible. You want them to have flaws, but also you want to see them do this cycle of trying and failing before they succeed at something. You know, if as soon as they walk in the room, it's like, oh, I know the answer to this, and they solve it, like, that actually doesn't make them more likable. In real life, you might be like, great, you can get out of here faster. You figured it out right away. But in a book, you want the reality of a character that is giving it their best and not making it, but maybe learning something from it, and eventually coming to a place where they can solve or at least solve part of it, or solve it in a different way, or decide it doesn't need solving all of a sudden. But along the lines that I brought up just a minute or two ago about my antagonist characters, do you feel like it's important for people to care about your antagonist characters? And if so, what do you do to make that happen?
I think that we're in an interesting place as far as popular media with how we portray antagonists and villains. Because, you know, growing up, I grew up in the 90s, with like Disney movies, villains were pretty black and white, right? They had motivations, but they were very clearly bad guys. And then I feel like we had a wave that was sort of reacting to that, you know, I want complex antagonists. I want like antagonists that I can relate to, and it's sort of tragic how they got there. And I get the sense that the next generation coming up is reacting to that. And so I'm wondering if we're gonna see another wave of just very simple, like, this guy he's just evil. He's just evil. I don't know that for sure. I don't have kids or interact with young children, but I'm curious if that's gonna happen. So I think it, you know, like everything, it depends. I personally like, I struggle with antagonists. I'm very like fluffy, like cozy fantasy. I like focusing on relationships. So when I have an antagonist, they're barely an obstacle, right? So, but what I like to read, like I do enjoy reading antagonists that have something that I can relate to, that I can see if the circumstances had just been a little bit different, they might have turned out differently, but it wasn't, and this is what happened to them, and that like draws me to them and makes me sad about it. But again, that's a preference. Sometimes you just need a bad guy. It depends.
I think I like what you said, Prof, and I think that whether we give our antagonists more background, okay, and develop them more as characters, I think it depends largely on what kind of novel we're writing. If we're writing a novel that's mainly psychological, okay, then I think we absolutely have to show to some extent the antagonist side. But if we're writing action novels, okay, I feel it would detract from the hero's journey, the protagonist's journey, to take time and stop and learn about the antagonist in an action novel.
I feel like the main villain in Saint Death's Daughter, which is the first book, is the Blackbird Bride. And she has a lot of reasons to behave like she does, but she goes too far. She doesn't, like, she's driven, and the main character, Lainey, knows exactly how she was harmed, and she knows that this woman is acting out of injury, which people do, and has a great deal of compassion for that, but not so much compassion that she's going to let her harm a child who never hurt her. You know, there's like justice and there's vengeance, and the villainy is tipping over from one to the other, but the interest lies in that wire walking, that balance, so I feel like that was of interest to me for Lainey as a character, to experience somebody that she feels deeply for, and in some cases culpable to and accountable to because of her family's harm to the Blackbird Bride's family, but not to the point where like you're not allowed to do this no matter what. You know, like you have to stop, and if I have to stop you, I will, even though it's really hard and it breaks my heart. I think that's an interesting thing for Lainey to have to go to. The second book, the villain is a ghost who is kind of a narcissistic megalomaniac, which, as we know from reality, can be fairly villainous, and it feels more black and white. However, in the first book, it's third person, limited to Lainey, so you only get her observing the world, like a little camera that's on her shoulder this time just hops right behind her eye. But in the second one, I took some time and switched POVs depending on the scene, never inside the scene. And I wanted to write a couple from the villain's point of view, which was hilarious. You know, it's kind of fun to write somebody completely unrelenting and unapologetic and just like wild bad, you know? And it was important then to show, what does a villain love? What are these moments of tenderness? Oh, that tenderness is really like flaying another person. So, you know, like you get the perspective, you get he's really bad, you're so ready for him to be taken care of, but you kind of like him anyway, but kind of also love to hate him. And I think I like a complex emotional reaction as a writer to this character, like, oh, I'm gonna mess you up so bad and you deserve it, but you know, kind of, I like you a little bit, like just because you that wild id, you can say anything and get away with it, you know?
So for me, at least, when I'm writing antagonistic characters, I kind of have this worldview that I don't believe in pure evil. I mean, yes, you can write a monster character, and maybe that's the case, but if you're going to try and fix it in the real world, there's a line from something I read many years ago about all evil is potential vitality in need of transformation. And so I like to take the antagonistic characters and not forgiving them and not trying to make them the heroes or anything, give you a little sense as to how they got to where they are. We have the fairy mistress character she was born, she was created to do the thing that she does, which is to sort of steal the life while she's being your muse. And it's hard to fault her for that. That's the thing that she does. That's how she survives. That doesn't mean you don't want to try to defeat her. But I think by giving you a little bit of background on her and where she comes from, you can see that she's not worth. It's not like you want to dismiss her with the wave of your hand. And this I think is a more it gives more depth to the character than simply saying she's a bad fairy and I need to smush her beneath our heels or something like that, right?
I think too that we all have you know, if we all exist on a spectrum of human emotions from like, I was born without empathy to I am over empathetic, you know, that like role play gives us an opportunity to play those parts of ourselves that we maybe don't explore in our daily lives. And I think having perspectives from villains, like there's some part of us that either may understand or seek to understand that behavior, and for a while to inhabit it is perhaps a healthy human thing.
Have you ever read Villains by Necessity by E. Ford? It's an older book.
No.
It's great. It's a parody of, like sort of a parody satire of fantasy tropes. And the idea is that the balance of good and evil is off, but there's too much good, and the world is at risk of being sublimated in light. So these last band of villains have to get together to like save the world from being overtaken by light. It's fantastic. There's this one segment that's a straight parody of the Dragonlance novels. It's hilarious. But they explore that a lot of like, what does a villain look like who is good? And it's great. It was out of print for a while, but I think it might be back in. Definitely recommend it. Villains by Necessity. Check it out.
So I have more questions, but I thought we'd do a little break and take a few questions from the audience. If you have a question, you want to hold up a card? Front row, pink hashtag.
Will you need a card?
You've done a really good job of talking about why you care about the characters from the inside and what makes them great. What is it that you do in terms of showing why we should care about them, so that a camera could look at them and say, I should care about them because they saved the starving puppy?
Oh, the save the cat thing?
Whatever it is that you do for these characters you care about so much, to show me as a reader, yes, cheer for this person right here.
Like a more mechanical kind of thing, like
Yes.
sort of like, what's the step, or what do you think is a characteristic?
For me, and like for An Unlikely Flock, the book is all about people coming together and becoming friends and helping each other overcome their various traumas. So again, it comes back to interactions between characters and how they treat one another. And one of the characters, Grout, who's sort of the main character, has been through some awful trauma that may have otherwise, you know, turned any other person into like a terrible person. But they're very insistent on like, I do not want to be that person. So you'll see them have their instincts on how to react to someone, how to react to another person, and then their internal struggle of like, no, I'm going to be the sort of person that trusts other people. I am choosing to trust these people, even though everything of their instincts is pointing otherwise. And then in turn, how the other characters react to them, like in situations they could very well have been justified being scared, and how they choose to treat them as a person. So for me, it all comes out in the interactions between characters and how they treat one another.
Well, I like to look at the way Andy Weil does this in Project Hail Mary. Okay, the main character, Ryland Grace, I think is his name. As the story begins, he wakes up out of a 3-year cryo sleep, if that's the right term, and he realizes that his other 2 partners, who were also in cryo sleep for 3 years, are dead. In other words, he is all alone on this spaceship, and he doesn't know where it is, but he can tell by looking that it's not in our solar system. So to me, it's not stated, Weil doesn't say that Ryland Grace felt great fear and great aloneness. I mean, he is alone as alone can be, but you, the reader, can sense it. So one way I think empathy is created there is by having the main character face unthinkable odds, okay? That we as readers identify with something that has to be overcome. And then the other way to achieve empathy for your characters, I think, is just to give them human weaknesses, something we can all identify with. At the same time that this is going on, that Grace wakes up and sees his partners are dead and he's alone on a spaceship, he doesn't know where and he doesn't know why, he can't remember, is that he, as his memory starts coming back, he realizes there are certain things he has to do. And he tries to do them, but he can't access the computer which controls the ship because he can't remember his password. And who hasn't been in that situation? Everything he tries to do, the computer says, incorrect password. He speaks to it, he argues with it, he pleads with it, incorrect password. And so we've all been in that situation. So you have this little common thing that I think really helps create empathy.
I feel like everybody's protagonist, or what, I guess why they're writing, so you're not always going to be writing a character that is likable. I like writing likable characters. Like, my goal is to write a character that if somebody would want to, like, you know, hang out at a bookstore with, you know, she may be able to raise armies of the undead, but she'd rather eat a pastry with you. And so when I'm looking at the characters that I want people to like, I'm thinking about my friends. It takes some analysis of human behavior. Why do I like this person? I love that she's covered with tattoos and every tattoo has a story. What do I love about this person? I love that she can play the guitar, and when she talks to children, she gets down on the ground with them. Why do I think this guy is cute? I think he's cute because he's a teacher, and as a teacher doesn't believe in being a sage on the stage. He loves a flipped classroom, which means he's giving autonomy and he's learning as much from his students as the students are learning from him. So why do you like people? Who are your friends? Why do you hang out with them? All right, so then there's an act of transference into the people on the page if you want that feeling. But there's also, like, do you want just a SOB to be your main character? You want to see why an incredibly flawed and sometimes vile person like, why would you follow him or her or them anywhere? But there are characters like that you just love, and because they are vile and flawed, like we are in very certain situations. And that's like, there's that law in filmmaking is that let them save the cat. No matter what else they do, if they've saved a cat, they're worth watching. So like that save the cat moment is a trick, it's a mechanic in writing. So what do people generally always love? And then you can make that person do that, and then they can maybe commit murder later, but as long as it's not killing an animal.
They saved that cat,
they've got a pass. Yeah. I know. So those are some things I do think about.
Right. So we had another question. I thought it was a blue hashtag, a blue cross.
It's not so much a question as a thought. I just finished reading Oathbreakers by Mercedes Lackey again. And one of the things they talk about is a demon who's supposed to be totally evil Belcrush. And they have a conversation, the two main protagonists, about whether evil can actually be redeemed or not. And at the end, the priest actually attacks the demon in a way so that it has to become good, or it will never be free.
Okay, good. That's a good one. What's the title again?
Oathbreakers.
By Mercedes Lackey.
Oathbreakers by Miss Mercedes Lackey, in case you didn't hear. Thank you. All the way in the back, and hashtag?
Yeah, I was just wondering, has there ever been a time that you began writing and you were kind of intending to focus on like one character or a set of characters, but then as you were writing, another character just completely pulled your focus?
All the time.
Randee, could you repeat the question?
He wants to know if you started out writing with a focus on one character, but another character just completely pulled your focus away. Claire, you were saying?
I would say I can give an example, but I think this is kind of common because it's something that sometimes has to come away and we're like, all right, you are really distracting, so I'm going to give you your own story later, you know, and then so I wrote a series in Darkbreakers, started out as a series of self-published novellas, and eventually they got second lives reprinted in magazines, and some of them went on to be anthologized in like Year's Best, and then I collected them in here and with some new stuff too. But the first novella, there was this secondary set of characters that were so like, just like stole every scene, and I'm like, you're actually not my lovers right now. And so I was paying attention. I'm like, you'll get your standard time, and I had to make sure that their screen time, you know, was less than the protagonists. But boy, that second book came out very fast because they were like, it's my turn now, and just had to like remember that there are some characters who are scene stealers, and to acknowledge that, celebrate it, but also like rein them in, you know.
I remember something that Ursula Vernon's did. Do you know Ursula Vernon? She's
Kingfisher.
Yes, yes. They were talking about how, and I don't remember which work or which character, but they were just talking about how a character they wrote in at the very, very, very end of the process that just needed to fill a specific function in one scene that they just throw in there ended up being like an obsession of the fans. Like they wanted to know so much about this character, and she was just like, what?
I wonder if it's the Saints of Steel books. Those were my favorite.
It was the Nun. It was the Nun. But I don't remember. It's been a long time. But that always stuck out to me is not only does like sometimes a character will take over you, but sometimes a character will resonate with your audience that you just never expected. And it's like, well, what do I do with this?
Yeah, I have, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I have characters in the Tune In Tomorrow books, which are brownies, like the helpful brownies that help you around the house and all of that, but they're assigned to the actors on the show, so everybody gets like their own little brownie helper. And I just love that concept, like they love to help. It's not just like, oh, I have to help this person. This is like part of their being, and I've worked them through this story and then through the next book that's coming up. And my editor recently said to me that she loves the brownies so much she thinks they're the actual heroes. And that just gave me an idea to like, oh, I think one of my next ones has to have a brownie as my main character. They don't fit right here. They're not going to take over the story here, but they are critical to the story being able to happen. So yeah, you don't want to necessarily take over this book, but if you mentally can put them to the side and say they have value for later, that will help.
That's good to get fan feedback. Like, what do they love, and analyze why they love it, and think what's the story there then.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, actually, Randee, what you said is my answer to the question is no. I've never had that happen to me, but I've kind of had the opposite happen. Something very painful. A novel that I wrote in the late '80s that I'm now thinking of rewriting because it wasn't published and setting it back in the '60s. So it will be technically historical fiction because it was 60 years ago. Okay, my agent and an editor both told me that one of the minor characters had to go, and I loved this minor character. I really identified with him. And so, in order to try to sell the book, I did rewrite it and took the minor character out, which is sort of the reverse of what you are asking. He's still there waiting, you know, for his own book maybe, I don't know.
So a way this happened to me, going back to my fan fiction, which I think fan fiction is a completely valid art form, so I have no shame. But I kept having this situation where I was writing the story and I was like, I need like an offhand character that I'll just, you know, like write for one sentence. Like I need a character for one sentence. And then they keep showing up. And then I'm like, well, I guess I need to give them a personality. And it kept happening just to flesh out the world. And it ended up, people were asking, oh, can you tell me the backstory of this character? And so they would like ask me on Tumblr or something. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna improvise the backstory of this character right here, right now, boom. And then I was like, oh, now I have to, it ended up incorporating it into the story. So it did happen a lot. It was fun. But it was kind of fun in a sense of like improv, right? Where it was like, oh, how do I expand on this character that I originally put in just for a one-off sentence, who it turns out now they're an important part of the story.
So one thing I want to touch on briefly is that the use of the character, the Mary Stu character, the Gary Stu Stu character, however you want to identify it. Do we all know what that is, or do I need to explain? Okay.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't know? Don't be afraid.
It's okay. All right, so just very briefly, you know, the Mary Sue or the Gary Stu character is this character. It's kind of like the writer putting themselves into the story. And everybody loves this character the minute they walk into the room. They're 22 years old and they have a doctorate and have already solved some, you know, major cancer discovery or whatever. And they're gorgeous. And this is a character that often is created by newer writers because you miss the elements of what's going to make them likable to anybody other than you. I'm wondering if you guys want to talk a little bit about that, but also talk about whether or not there's any value in having a character like that or similar to that.
I don't know about whether there's any value, but I can tell you from personal experience that in the 1980s, which is the period in which I was writing mystery novels, it was very common for upcoming mystery writers to write those kind of characters, often with the same first name as the author's first name, okay? And women authors would write about women characters with their first name, and male authors would write about male characters with their first name. And I was in the process of creating my first fictional detective, and I wanted them to be Croatian American because I'm Croatian American, and there were no Croatian American detectives as far as I could tell. And so I thought that might be my little inroad. It turned out to not be, and I now understand why. But I made a point of, while I gave them a Croatian last name, Dragovic, I made them male. Okay, that was one distancing factor to make so that they weren't a Gary Sue or a what?
Gary Stu, Mary Sue.
Yeah, okay. And I gave Frank Dragovic, he grew up in a city, I grew up on a farm in a small town, okay? I just made it different in as many ways as I could. And I found that one thing that really helped me was think about them as a character, not me. And so I felt it made me more creative.
So the thing that I'm not particularly interested in, like, whether they have value or not. What's interesting to me is how hostile we are towards them. Like, it's not just, oh, this character is not very, like, people get mad. We get so angry about the concept of this trope that people get legit hostile. And I think that's a fascinating look at our culture. I don't exactly understand what it means, but to me, that's the interesting question. Like, why do people hate them so much? And why do we react like in such a hostile way? Or even the perception that a character might be a Mary Sue. Like, you can get a whole mob riled up and attacking the actor that plays the character. So I believe that's a more interesting exploration for me rather than like whether they have value or not.
And Gary Stu was added later. It was really, I feel, attacking female characters who were efficient and smart and like kind. So I actually have a different reaction to that because I think of Mary Sue, the way people see it, is different than a young writer writing themselves into a character. And I also feel like it's useful now that we have language for Mary Sue and Gary Stu to play with it as a trope, because it's now become, if you create it to be just that, then it becomes an archetype or like a style. So if you want a certain style of a thing, and then to break the archetype is going to be interesting or funny if you're doing comedic. But first, I think it's like useful to say, why don't we like this smart, kind, and good-looking character? Well, how do we feel about ourselves today? But it is more interesting I think if they do have a flaw, because nobody's just one thing, And so if they're plastic, there's an uncanny valley aspect there, doll-like, or there's something else that we're putting this person and calling them human, or calling this person a woman when a woman also has other things going on. So yeah, I think it's either like you're either shunting something into a corner and mislabeling it, or or there's people who are just angry at, like, I don't know, efficient women.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of degree, right? And sometimes with that kind of character, you end up seeing that, oh yes, but she does have a flaw. She doesn't cook well.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, that's not actually a character flaw. So, you know, when you're picking the character flaws to make them more human, it needs to be something that's actually a character flaw. We have another, I thought it was another question here. Yellow X.
Okay. Yeah, with the Mary Sue, what I've seen with it, and I've read a couple novels that have those types of Mary Sue, Gary Sue. The problem with them, there's no growth with the character. And that's what makes the reader generally will identify with the character and like them. If they remain flat all the way through, and they can all the way through the book, and they remain the same. And so, you know, generally that breaks the rules that your characters over the course of a novel should change. You should have some sort of growth or change to them. But I have the question I have. We've talked about plot and so on as far as how to make characters likable. There's a lower level thing that goes on too, and it's how you write the novel or the story, short story, in that if you over narrate it, the reader cannot identify with the characters as much because there's a distancing. You're sort of like you're watching a movie, but you're not picking up, you don't have the movie in front of you because it's not, you don't have the visual part of it. The next level to bring the reader in is the dialogue. You know, dialogue going on with the protagonist that tends to bring the reader in a little bit closer. And then there's sort of a third, I'm being general, but there's a third level is where you have the dialogue and you have the thoughts of the protagonist, your main character, and some of the other characters too, depending on how you're writing it. And so it's, what I've seen and read is that it's very important to have that in there because the other layers of the plot and so on can feel on you to be too narrative, be too much rather than showing the characters. How do you do yours?
Depends on the book.
Yeah. You mean like the different layers?
Yeah, do you tend to try to get both thoughts and the dialogue in with the protagonist and the characters to help the reader just relate from that very low level before you then layer on the plots?
I think it depends on the author. I love dialogue. I'm a big dialogue person. I'm super heavy dialogue. But it depends on the author and the story and the...
And you don't want to be over-explaining, right? Like, you know, show, don't tell, and you can do that by showing the character doing things and not necessarily having extensive conversations to reveal one element. It's about paring it down. I will have long conversations with
This is what editors are for. Editors are great for this. They'll get rid of all the words you don't need.
Right.
There's a fun thing where you have a dialogue. She said this and then thought but didn't say, you know, and you can see those things side by side. Like unlike in television, although sometimes voiceovers speak the subtext, you know, you can speak your subtext, but even so, you're not going to speak every subtext. So what you leave out is as important as what you put in, but that's prose style. You know, what do you want the reader to know? But there's going to be some things you keep a secret. You know,
Maybe you just say they made a face.
yeah.
Or you want them to infer some things, you know.
Or like Murderbot, who's a first-person protagonist. So you get his thoughts and his dialogue, but it'll say something like, "I am having an emotion," but it won't define the emotion. You can usually get it from context.
Right.
I love Murderbot.
I love it too.
I think we have another question right here, the pink X.
Yeah. So when I'm writing, I write a lot of elements of my story as if it were a character. For example, a city, I will write that as if it were a character. An object, if a character has a revolver that they use a lot, I will write that as though it was its own character. What do you guys personally consider to be a character, or how do you, what objects in your story or what things in your story do you treat as though they were characters?
So I'm going to go on a tangent because I'm a game designer, right? And I've worked on games for 17 years, and I worked on Destiny 2, which is a shooter where the guns are very important. You have exotic guns, and we treat the guns as characters because they're with you all the time. They're the prominent thing on screen. So when we're crafting those objects, they have lore. We treat them as how they move, how they sound, like how their reload animation works. Like the philosophy is like these guys are characters.
But that's games. It just made me think of that. Think of Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. The first paragraph, the immortal paragraph, is about the house as a character. In genre, you can do that because you can haunt a house, which means in some way it's sentient or has a consciousness within it that is making the house as an object behave. Haunted objects, but also in fantasy, any object, endowed object, I have a tiger rug that it's a dead skin, which means a necromancer has some power over it. So she raises this tiger rug up, and the tiger becomes a literal character named Stripes. And you can do that in fantasy, and you play it. But I remember Stephen King in Under the Dome has this wonderful moment where he just zooms in on is it a chipmunk? Is it a chipmunk or a squirrel? And just follows the squirrel around, having squirrel thoughts and seeing what the squirrel sees when the dome comes down and bisects the animal. And that's the end of that character perspective. But it was the most wonderful moment of nobody else sees the moment except this little thing that humans don't regard. But you really love that squirrel chipmunk for that moment so much, and you really it's such a perfect, almost cinematic, but there's such an internal emotion to it as well. But I love doing that, just following a chair around for a while. The chair has seen some things, but nobody knows what the chair has seen except you and the chair.
You can also do it through the relationship of the character to his objects. So a gunslinger's relationship to his gun, how he treats it, how he thinks about it. It doesn't have to be as literal as the gun is magic and has a personality. It's just a significant object to this person's identity in their life, and how they relate to it in the same way they would relate to another character can show that.
I think also one of those things that you need to be careful with, lest you fall into the area of twee of everything.
There's nothing wrong with twee.
Twee can be fun.
Depends on the genre you're writing in.
Exactly.
And then I would say you should listen to what your non-characters who are acting as characters are telling you. I mean, think of Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. The setting is practically another character. It is so pervasive and so important to the book. And I trust that that's kind of what you meant. It's an environmental, not that the characters are talking. I mean, not that the house is talking or...
Well, the Gothic is all about atmosphere as character,
Yeah.
the setting as character, houses become important, landscape becomes important. Sometimes it's sentient literally, and sometimes it's just, it affects everybody in mood, in voice, in the way they move through the world, the way they dress, when it's as present as a character as your protagonist, that they wouldn't be separate, they can't be separated.
Right. So we are basically, I think we have just a couple of minutes left. I thought we would just quickly go down the panel and tell us where else you're going to be this weekend, where people can find you.
Okay. Later today, I'm at the Backstory. One of you is, yes, no? Okay, the Backstory panel. Tomorrow at 11 o'clock, I read the first chapter of Exit Velocity and discuss what a writer is trying to do in her first chapter, things such as creating character, voice, inciting incident, revealing conflict, etc. And then my other two panels on Saturday are self-publishing and standalones versus series.
Later today, at some time that Kyle will tell me, there's a panel that I'm on with my two my musical theater collaborators, Tina Connolly, who's a middle grade and adult fantasy writer, and Dr. Mary Crowell, who's an incredible folk musician, about writing a science fiction and fantasy musical, and also our collaboration and the role of filk and musicals. So that's happening
3:30 at Lakeshore Walk.
3:30.
Which is downstairs next to Mason.
Downstairs at Lakeshore A. That's happening. And then tonight I'm so excited because Carlos and I have collaborated on creating a tabletop role-playing game called Negocios Infernales. It's GM-less, it's collaborative, and we're running a game from 7 to 11. We'd love to see you there. We'll show it off, and some people will be playing, so that'll be awesome.
It filled up 20 minutes after signups opened.
Okay, never mind.
Only watch current.
We love an audience.
All right, so for mine, tonight at 7 o'clock in Hyatt 2 Greenway 1, I will be on a panel about the psychology of gaming. Tomorrow I'll be moderating the panel on self-publishing and this room, I believe. Also tomorrow at 11, we're going bird watching. If it rains, I don't care. I live in Seattle. Then tomorrow night at 7, I'm hosting an improv storytelling game activity. Should be fun. Tomorrow at 11, or not tomorrow, Sunday at 11, I'm on a panel about how to have a hobby without turning it into a hustle. Beautiful. Yes. And then after this, I'm going to be getting into my Elden Ring Nomadic Merchant cosplay and wandering around. So if you see me, say hi.
Very nice. Tomorrow I am on Guilty Pleasure Television. I'm also on Series versus Standalone. Sunday I have Everything Old is New Again, and the fabulous Is It a Sandwich? So I hope you will join us for that. And if I'm not at a panel, which is not always likely, it was just, I'm always at a panel, it feels like. I will be at the merch room, and I'm happy to tell you more about my books. We have books for sale there, as well as Prof Brown.
Yes, come to the merch room, buy my book.
Yes.
And these are in the dealer's room, and Kyle has them for sale right now with his square if you want them.
Right, so merch room, dealer's room, merch room, dealer's room.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming. I hope this was useful, and thanks for